Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Intermediate Campaign Setup Workshop. We're so excited to share this content with you here today, and we hope this new knowledge will help to really up-level your campaign setup. Throughout the session, feel free to ask any questions you may have in the Q&A box, and we will answer them at the end of the session. In addition, at the end, we will take note of the attendees and select a lucky winner to have an opportunity for a one-on-one consultation with the Reddit Ads account manager. This is an excellent opportunity for you to dive deeper into specific campaign questions you may have and receive feedback on your own campaign setup, targeting strategy, or even review your previous reporting. So to introduce myself, my name is Kat. I'm on the channel marketing team here at Reddit, where we focus on helping SMB and mid-market advertisers really understand the value of Reddit ads and find success with their ad campaigns. So let's jump on in. I know we have a ton of great stuff and you definitely want to hear all of it. So I'm here today with our Reddit ads subject matter expert, Lawson, who I'll let introduce himself.
Thanks, Kat. Hey, everyone. My name is Lawson Marion. I'm an account manager on the mid-market growth team here at Reddit. A little bit of background about me and what I do at Reddit. I work very closely with advertisers who want to run on our platform and help them strategize what they want to do with their campaigns, help them build out their campaign with a good strategy in place. And then post-launch, we review reporting data, find highlights and optimization opportunities so that we can pivot clients' campaigns towards achieving goals and KPIs. So really looking forward to hosting this webinar with everyone, and let's jump into it. So before we get started, I did want to go over an agenda really quickly. So today, first off, we are just going to be talking through planning and strategy for your ad campaign on Reddit. Once we've done that, we will jump into an overview of campaign setup and how to set up your campaign strategically to achieve goals depending on what your objective is. Once we've kind of walked through the strategy and the setup side of things, we will go into reporting and optimizing. So we'll be talking over some reporting best practices. We will actually be going through a report live where I'll sort of be showing you what sort of things we would notice and highlight and pivot towards in a real scenario. Finally, we will wrap up with a key takeaway section where we'll sort of recap the best practices from this deck. And then lastly, we will have the last 15 to 20 minutes of this webinar open to a live Q&A where we can answer all your questions. Okay, let's get into it. So first and foremost, planning and strategy. When you are planning to run a campaign on Reddit, there are 5 key questions you really need to ask yourself before you even start setting up your campaign. So first and most importantly is, what is the goal or objective of the campaign? This is important because it's going to define how you're going to be building out your campaign, how you are ultimately going to be looking at reporting data and optimizing and basically the entire setup from start to finish. So this can be as specific as a really hard KPI like a $14 cost per install, for example. Or it can be much broader. It can be, if you have a campaign where you just want engagement in the form of CTR, you can have that as your KPI. You might have a KPI that's driving users to site, but as long as you've identified what the actual goal is, that is very important in defining, how you're going to be moving going forward with setting up a campaign. Next is, who is your target audience? Who is going to be most receptive to this messaging? Who do you really want to serve ads to? And where do you think you're going to see success? Third is, how are you going to be tracking performance on this campaign? So this is important because you could have the perfect campaign set up. It could be delivering great. It could be generating a ton of conversions. But if you don't have the right tracking in place and you aren't able to actually measure how it's doing, you're never going to know if the campaign's a success and you won't be able to optimize it. Fourth is, what makes my product or offer compelling? What is the value proposition of what you're promoting and why should a user convert? And then finally, what are your flight dates and budgets? And this is important really depending on what your goal or objective is. So for example, if you have a 10K test budget and you are running a campaign that is promoting maybe a movie release, for example, you might be able to spend that 10K over the course of 5 days to have a completely successful campaign if your objective is just to deliver in full and drive users to site. On the flip side of that, though, if you had a campaign that was going after a low cost per install or cost per purchase event, you would probably want to take that same 10K and spread it out over the course of maybe 3 to 4 weeks. That way, you're able to launch with a good strategy in place after you've allowed the campaign to ramp up and get enough statistically relevant data behind each audience and each creative you're running and see what works and what doesn't work and tailor your strategy towards that. If you give it enough time, you will be able to hit your goals. But if you spent too much upfront, you would never know what works and what doesn't. So they are all important things to keep in mind when you are setting up your campaign. All right, so one of the first things I want to cover off on is creative, because creative on Reddit is a factor that will, it can make or break the success of your campaign. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here. We have a great creative best practices webinar, which if you haven't watched it already, I highly recommend you take a look at that. It's going to go through a ton of detail into how to make your creative as good as possible on Reddit. But just to cover off on a few of the absolute best practices that you should abide by when selecting creative on Reddit, there are a few key things you want to keep in mind. So first off, you want to make sure that your creative has a very clear value proposition. You want to be able to articulate to a user what it is you're selling and why they should convert and get it. We see advertisers who have those sort of key components in their creative who are running on Reddit as our best performers. So it's very important to make sure that you are covering off on that with your creative. Next is when you are selecting the copy, and especially the headline copy that you're planning on running on Reddit, make sure that your copy has a authentic and conversational tone about it. When you're running on Reddit, you want to make sure that you are speaking to users more as you would a friend or someone you're familiar with, and less just giving them a generic advertisement. Reason there being that people are coming to Reddit to really lean into the content and engage in conversations and talk about things that they're passionate about. And tailoring your ad copy to be a little bit more native on our platform is going to make users have a better opinion of your brand and your products. And when a user has a better opinion of you, they're more likely to convert. Another thing to note when you are selecting a creative is make sure that if you have a promo code or sale or free shipping or any sort of added incentive, make sure you're highlighting that in your creative. Sometimes a promo code or a sale offer is going to be that catalyst that takes a user from seeing your ad and considering a conversion to actually going through and making a purchase. Next, you really want to plan ahead for preventing ad fatigue. And this depends on your targeting and how high your frequency is. But we do tend to see that if you are hitting the same user with an ad multiple times, eventually they're going to get familiar with it and they might develop ad blindness. So you want to plan ahead, maybe at the either 2-week mark or 4-week mark to have a minor creative refresh. And this doesn't have to be a huge lift. It can be as simple as making a slight adjustment to the headline copy just so that it's a little bit different. It could be even just taking a banner image and changing the background color, but making those adjustments and keeping your creatives fresh is going to keep users engaged when they see an ad. And when a user is engaged and actually focusing on your ad, again, they're more than likely to convert on it. And then finally, don't spread your impressions too thin on creatives. So some advertisers come to us and they have a bunch of different creatives they want to launch with up front, and they just sort of want to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. From our perspective, we usually recommend going and taking the opposite approach, where we recommend you launch with 2 to 4 of your favorite creatives and give the campaign between 7 to 10 days to fully ramp up and get enough statistically relevant delivery data against each ad group and each creative so that you can see with data backing it up what's working, what isn't working, and you can pivot your creative strategy and your copy strategy from there. Doing that is going to help you optimize your campaign a lot earlier than if you just launched everything and you need to wait 3 to 4 weeks for enough data to come back. And another bonus of that is when we are talking about creative refreshes, if you only launch with a few variations, and after that 7 to 10 day ramp up period, you notice, one variation is not performing as well as the others, you have all these other creatives you've already built on hand, and you can quickly make a refresh. It's very low lift for you, and it's going to give our users a better user experience. And if they're seeing new ads and they're happy, again, they're more than likely to click your ad and make a conversion event. So in addition to creative, we are going to talk about measurement and attribution. So again, this is super important because you could have the perfect setup. Your creative could be great, but you won't know if your campaign's working or not if you can't measure it. So this is something you definitely want to have very locked down before you start running with us. One of the first things you want to do when you're thinking about measurement and attribution is identifying what your primary KPI is and what metrics you want to track. This is going to really decide how you're going to build out your whole campaign. So be sure you have those identified before we get started. Next, you really can go 2 ways with tracking on Reddit. The first is Reddit has its own first-party pixel that can track up to 8 different conversion events, and we offer that as added value to all advertisers who are running with us. So the Reddit pixel is definitely something we recommend. You were able to get a lot of very granular data back. The pixel is pretty straightforward to set up. It can just be placed directly on site or configured through a tag manager. And another bonus of it is if you do plan on using retargeting with us down the road, the retargeting product right now is only able to retarget off of Reddit data. So making sure you have the Reddit pixel in place is a great way to set yourself up for success if you do want to use that feature down the road. Another way you can track with us is Reddit is able to accept most third-party tags. And we also have direct integrations with almost all of the larger MMPs out there. So if you were running a campaign that's tracking through Google Campaign Manager, for example, we can accept those tags. If you have a little bit more basic setup of using URLs with UTM codes, we can definitely take those. And then if you're running an app install campaign, again, we are directly integrated with the larger MMPs like Adjust and Kochava and Branch and Singular. So you would just need to activate us as a partner in those platforms. One thing to kind of keep in mind too is that even if you are using your own third-party tracking as your source of truth, you still might want to consider placing the Reddit pixel as well. Reason there being is that if you're using a URL with a UTM code, you might not be able to be getting back as granular data as the Reddit pixel might provide. You will be missing out on view through and click through conversions sometimes, and you will have that split out. So even if it isn't going to be your source of truth in the end, it doesn't hurt you to have that kind of extra layer of data. And then finally, we highly, highly recommend that you include both click-through and view-through data in your attribution numbers. So this is really important because Redditors tend to do a little bit more research before they make a conversion than users from some other platforms. This is especially true of more high-cost conversion events like really expensive purchases or signing up for something like life insurance or health insurance. And it's going to give you a better sense of how your campaign is actually performing with us. So even if view-through data is not going to be a primary KPI for you, including it is going to give you a better idea overall of the health of the campaign. So now that we sort of talked through overall strategy, we can get into campaign setup. So there are 3 main stages to setting up a campaign on Reddit. The first is going to be actually creating your campaign. The second is going to be creating an ad group within the campaign. And the third is going to be creating your actual ads. Since this is more of a 201 where we're going to be talking about strategy and more of like that intermediate level of campaign setup, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the first or third stages. We have a great 101 webinar that if you kind of want to get a foot on the basics of it, definitely recommend you go back and watch that webinar. But today we're going to be focusing mostly on the second stage, which is creating your ad groups. So when you are building out ad groups within a campaign on Reddit, we want to break out our campaign into three key portions. We want to look at our campaign from a primary audience level, a secondary audience level, and an efficiency audience level. So first, we're going to talk about our primary ad groups. The primary ad groups are going to be targeting users that are sort of your core audience. So for example, if we are trying to promote and sell a video game, these ad groups are going to be targeting users within our gaming interest group or maybe our video game sub-interest group, because these are the people we feel are going to be most likely to convert and make some sort of purchase event. And something you want to keep in mind when you are building these out is more than likely you're going to be running in our auction with us. And because this is your core audience, and this is likely where you're going to see the most success, you want to have your highest bid here because you want to make sure that you are very competitive here and you're reaching as many of these people as possible. So next, we're going to talk about secondary ad groups. So with secondary ad groups, these ad groups are going to be targeting users who might not be directly in your core target audience, but they are within interest groups that sort of surround that core audience. So if we go back to that video game example, if we have our primary ad group targeting video game users, our secondary ad groups might be targeting television and entertainment, for example, or maybe it's books and graphic novels. But those are two big interest groups that sort of surround that video game audience. And those do have a good likelihood to also be successful for us. A good idea to kind of keep in mind here when you're building those out is you don't need as high of a bid as you did in the primary ad group within your secondary ad groups. Secondary ad groups are mainly for you to be looking for additional users who might be willing to convert and sort of scaling out your campaign. So it's important to have a healthy bid here so that you're able to get enough delivery that you can assess the health and value of these audiences, but you don't need to be spending as high of rates. These can be a little bit more efficient. So next, we're going to be talking through the efficiency ad group. The efficiency ad group is going to be where you are going to be trying to reach as many users as possible at scale efficiently. Typically, this ad group has the broadest targeting. We usually recommend just doing it as run of site. And it's a great way for you to, just gauge sort of mass appeal of your product. And if you're able to just see success within the larger Reddit audience. But it's also a good way to just sort of build awareness of your product. This is really important if you have a product that might not have a huge branding presence yet, or it's sort of new to market. Being able to run sort of as run of site is a great way to make users a little bit more familiar with the product and what you're promoting, so that when they do receive an ad in a very contextually relevant place, there's going to be a higher likelihood that they are going to know what you're selling and convert. And a pro tip here is because the efficiency ad group has such broad targeting, you can have your most efficient rates here. You have all of the whitelisted subreddits on Reddit to run on, so you don't need to be as competitive. And an added bonus of this is that we often do see users converting pretty highly on run of site lines. So I know it is a little bit scary sometimes to launch a campaign that doesn't have too much targeting and just sort of hope that it's going to have a good return for you, but more than likely you are going to see efficiency here, and it is going to be a great way for you to sort of layer in a branding play into your campaign. So now that we've sort of talked through our main products we're going to be talking about, which are the promoted posts and how we will set those up from a targeting perspective, I want to go over two new ad products that are just getting rolled out. So first, our conversations ad groups. These ad groups allow you to place an ad above the first comment within the comment section of a post on Reddit. And if any of you are Redditors, you know that more than likely you're coming to Reddit to go into comments and engage with other users about a post. This is probably the most highest trafficked place on Reddit. There's a ton of engagement there, and it's a great place for you to have your ads around. Another bonus too is if someone is searching something and they want to search it on Reddit, but they're doing it through a search engine, when they are searching something, for example, like if I was looking for a review of an entertainment system and I wanted to know what a Redditor's opinion of was it, I would look that up in a search bar, and when I clicked on the result I found in search, it would take me to a post and the comment section of the post. So it also is going to be where users are going to be coming to Reddit directly from a search. Some added bonuses of the conversation pages are that because this is where people are extremely active, we tend to see conversation pages having a really high conversion rate. These are great DR drivers. And since it is a new product and we don't have as much inventory competition in it right now, you can get rates that are maybe half of what you're doing on promoted posts. So the conversation page is a great place for you to both get a lot of impressions really efficiently, but also have a lot of really strong down funnel success. We highly recommend including these on your media plans. So next, we are going to be talking about retargeting. So one little nuance of targeting that I mentioned on you using the Reddit Pixel, we are only able to retarget off of Reddit data right now. That said, though, retargeting is very important if you have a direct response campaign and you have a hard lower funnel KPI like driving purchases or driving signups for something. So retargeting is going to only be serving ads to users who have clicked on your ad and had some sort of engagement, whether that's landing on your page or making an add to cart event or something along those lines. You are able to specifically target those users and re-engage them to kind of push them into that last stage of making a purchase. Usually these are going to be your best performing direct response drivers. A caveat of running retargeting is that because you are going after a very narrow group of people, it's only people who've engaged with your ads, you do need to set your highest bids in these placements. So make sure that you have a really strong bid here so that you're able to win almost every impression against these users. Again, that is sometimes a little bit of a scary thing for advertisers to set a high bid on these placements, but because these users have a very high likelihood to make a conversion event, we almost always see these placements still back into a very efficient cost per action, even if you're setting a high rate. Okay, so now that we've sort of walked through campaign setup and the thought process behind setting up your campaign, we can get into looking at your campaign post-launch with reporting and optimizing. So first up, we're going to go through some reporting best practices. The first thing that I really want to instill on all of you is after you've launched your campaign, make sure that you give your campaign at least 7 to 10 days before you start making optimizations. It's really important to monitor your campaign from day one and just make sure that it's pacing well and keeping an eye on it. But you don't want to start changing things and taking actions if you don't have enough statistically relevant data behind it to make an informed decision. If you give the campaign enough time and you are able to see, with hard data, what works and what doesn't work, you're going to make better choices. And if you make better choices that are better informed, it's likely going to drive success. Whereas if you're making choices based on just a small amount of data that doesn't have a lot of meaning behind it, you're sort of just making choices in the dark. Another thing that I just kind of want to circle back on from our attribution slide is please make sure that if you can, include both click and view through data in your reporting. Again, this is really important in being able to properly assess performance on our platform, just because so many of our users are going to do a little bit more research before they convert, and because just due to the nature of our audience being more leaned into the content, they might see an ad, but they might not be willing to break from their experience in that moment. So view through is a great way to get a more holistic view of how your campaign is performing and what's performing. So once you've given your campaign enough time to ramp up and you have assessed what you can and can't pull into your reporting, you should be ready to actually start downloading reports. So you can save reporting views if you have different reports you want to do. And you can also schedule automated reports that will just be sent to your email on a daily basis. So we're going to jump into the reporting dashboard and just walk through how you build out your dashboard and how you're ultimately going to be building out your report. First thing is you're going to be looking at metrics in the dashboard. So the metrics are going to be what you are going to actually be looking at. That can be impressions, clicks, spend, and on the flip side of that, that can be lower funnel events like page visits, add to carts, purchases, installs, things along those lines. But those are going to be the actual delivery metrics you're going to be looking at. Next, within our breakdown dropdown here, you can split out data by a handful of breakouts for what makes sense to you. So if you want to view performance by individual day, we can do that. You can split it out by country if you're doing an international campaign, or by DMA. So this is a good way for you to get very granular insights, again, into what's working and what isn't working, and better inform your decisions. Once you have set up all the metrics you like and you've broken out the data the way you need it broken out, you are going to be able to export your campaign. And again, you can either do that by setting up a recurring automated report, which is just going to be sent to an email you specify, or you can download it immediately as a CSV. Okay, so now we're going to get into my favorite part of the webinar, which is actually looking at a report and analyzing it and pulling out some optimization opportunities. So this example is very loosely based on the campaign setup we did, where we have a primary ad group, a secondary ad group, and we're also running some comment pages. A little bit of background on this hypothetical campaign. This campaign is an app install campaign, and our goal here is a $15 cost per install. So first up, we're going to look at where are we seeing the most efficient cost per install, right? And immediately I can see that these two lines that are highlighted in green are our best performers, and they're both comment pages. Again, just kind of going back to what I was speaking to earlier, conversation pages tend to be our best performing units in terms of driving lower funnel results. They're really strong attribution providers because they are hitting people where they are most active on Reddit. So when I'm looking at this, I can see that conversation pages are getting a lot of delivery. The estimated cost per click, the bid, is very low. This is super efficient. And we are generating the most installs here, and we have the most efficient cost per install. So right away, we know that this is a place where we want to increase our budget because we're just seeing success across the board, from upper funnel to lower funnel. Next, let's take a look at primary ad groups. So highlighted in blue, we have our primary ad group in Android at the top here, and we have our primary iOS ad group down about the middle of the report. And when we're looking at this, we can see right away that iOS has a better cost per install than Android. We also want to be looking at another factor here, which is delivery. So we can see that Android is delivering just about $650, whereas iPhone is just beating $400. So Android is delivering quite a bit more. And you can see that its bid is higher. So it's at like a 87-cent cost per click, whereas the primary ad group for iOS is 75. So right away, we can see that iOS is doing well, but we probably don't have a strong enough rate on iOS to get enough delivery to scale up that success. So what we're going to want to do here is we are going to want to increase our iOS CPC bid so that we can get more delivery in that ad group. And the more delivery we get, the higher number of installs we get, and we're going to get more installs at a more efficient cost per install. On the flip side of that too, Android is, it's still under our $15 cost per install benchmark. So it's doing fine, but we might want to consider lowering the rate a little bit. It has a lot of delivery right now. That's not a problem for it. So maybe we want to drop that rate down by 10 cents to start and see if we can still generate a lot of installs, but not pay as much for it. Next, let's take a look at our secondary ad groups. So in our secondary ad groups, we again have it split out by Android and iOS. And when we look at both of those, we see that the cost per install is pretty good for both. It's $10.73 for Android and $11.26 for iOS. So both are very healthy when we are comparing it to that $15 cost per install goal. Again, we kind of want to do the same thing we did with the primary ad group, where how much are we actually delivering in these ad groups? And we can see the same trend of Android is delivering more and it has a little bit higher rate. Whereas iOS is delivering less budget. It's still performing well, but it has a lower rate. So right away, we want to sort of mirror what we did with the primary ad groups and increase our rate on iOS a bit so that we're able to get more delivery there. More delivery should translate into more installs that will have that same low cost per install event. Another thing we want to think about too is going back to the Android primary ad group. I mentioned earlier we might want to lower rates because we don't need as much delivery in that placement, because it's fine, but it is our least efficient placement of the campaign. I would recommend that we take some budget away from the Android primary ad group and split that evenly between Android and iOS secondary ad groups. Those are they're both performing better than the Android primary. And it'll be a way for us to be able to deliver more at a lower rate and have a more efficient cost per install. So just to kind of recap, on this slide, we just have an overview of the optimizations I recommended based on the data we were seeing and sort of the rationale behind why we are going to make the changes we are going to make. And before we go any further, I do just want to cover off on a few best practices when you are making optimizations on your campaign. So first and most importantly, because you can see it in that giant orange text box, please allow your optimizations at least 5 days of delivery before you assess the impact of whether it worked or not. You will not see a change more than likely in your campaign after a day after optimizing it. You really need to give it time to be able to assess, did this work or did this not work? Next, you really want to think about the inventory size and rates when you're optimizing. So, you might have a primary ad group that's very narrowly targeted and it might be doing great, but in order to spend more there, and when you spend more, you deliver more impressions. When you deliver more impressions, it's going to scale conversions. But if you need to spend, if you need a higher rate to deliver more in a narrow ad group, it might not make sense to optimize there. You might see a lot of success there, but it might cost you 3x to increase your investment there. So make sure you're considering that. And when you're thinking about that, maybe look at secondary ad groups that have broader targeting, or maybe look at that efficiency ad group if it's doing well, because that might be the best way for you to deliver more and get higher conversions, but also you won't have to pay as much for those. Next is think about broadening your targeting. If you have a campaign that overall is narrowly targeted and it's performing well, try expanding that targeting out, whether that means you were targeting only sub-interest groups and you're seeing success in all of them. Try expanding it by a few new sub-interest groups, or maybe expand it up to an interest group. You are probably going to be able to scale results in similar audiences if you open up delivery a little bit. Another bonus too of broadening your targeting is you can lower your rates, because you don't need to be as competitive when you are able to reach more users. Another thing is when you are looking at the health of ad groups overall, take a look at individual creatives and optimize there before you decide whether an ad group is working or not. So for example, if we were looking at an ad group that was entertainment versus an ad group that was, let's say, national news, and national news was not performing as well, we wouldn't want to shut off national news right away. We would recommend going in there and seeing, from the creatives we're running, what sort of creative and messaging is working really well, what isn't, and then you can tailor your creative messaging and your strategy towards what works for that audience. Just because the same messaging won't work for everyone, right? Someone who's consuming news and politics is going to be different than someone who's consuming entertainment and television. So those are important things to think about before you just decide that an entire interest group isn't working for you. And then finally, optimize gradually. So when you're making an optimization, again, if you see one ad group performing better than another or one creative performing better than another, we don't recommend going with an all or nothing approach of just putting 100% into what works and totally pulling out of what doesn't work. We would recommend just sort of going with a little bit more of a test and learn strategy. Maybe consider going from a 50-50 split to a 70-30 split or a 65-35 split. That way you can gradually scale up where you think is going to succeed. You can make sure that after that 5-day assessment period, the added budget is actually generating more conversions. It's still efficient for you. And you can get a better sense of if this is a good choice or not, as opposed to just putting everything in there and then not knowing whether or not it was a good choice because you totally shut off another ad group or it's just delivering such low impressions that you can't assess it. All right, so now we are finally at key takeaways. With key takeaways, we do just want to go over 3 main things that are important to keep in mind after all this webinar. So first, planning a strategy, be sure to take time to really thoughtfully plan out your campaign before you build it and launch it. Make sure that you've identified all 5 of those questions we asked at the beginning of the webinar. Make sure that you have good creative in there, you have a targeting strategy in place, and you know what you're tracking. Next is campaign setup. So make sure that when you're building out your campaign, you're building it out strategically. Make sure that you are segmenting out your campaign between that primary, secondary, and efficiency ad group. Think about whether or not you want to include conversation pages or retargeting ad groups, and sort of think about what's going to work and what isn't going to work for you. And then finally, when we are talking about reporting and optimization, make sure that, again, you allow your campaign to ramp up. When you make changes, you give the changes enough time for you to be able to properly assess if they work or not. And when you are reviewing performance and optimization opportunities, you are looking at things that have statistical relevance to them. For example, you're not making a big optimization based on $50 in spend. That's just not enough spend for you to know if it works or not. So make sure you're just sort of thinking strategically there. All right, and then we are going to open it up for QA.
Thank you so much for sharing your insider tips and tricks, Lawson. That was extremely valuable to get your insider knowledge from a Reddit ads expert like you. I hope you guys all found that super helpful. I know I did, but now I'm sure you guys have a ton of questions. So let's head over to the Q&A and see what you guys want to know more about. All right, let's get into these. So let's start off with the most upvoted question from Micah. What are reasons there might be a mismatch between Reddit ad click reporting and actual website views? Great question. We get this one all the time. Lawson, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure thing. So we have a really good help article on this that we can include after we go through all of this. But in general, the difference is just due to the fact that, when you compare numbers from one ad server to another, there's always going to be a discrepancy. So, whether that's looking at like Reddit clicks versus Google Analytics page visits, or even if you're looking at Google Analytics page visits compared to Google Campaign Manager page visits, because every ad platform is tracking things differently, there's always going to be a little bit of a mismatch there.
Totally. I'll be sure to send over that help article. We dive into many different reasons like that like Lawson mentioned. But yeah, there's going to be discrepancy. Our site is measuring clicks on the ad, whereas you're looking at visits to your website. So there's going to be some drop off there, but we give more reasons why in that help article. Okay, next one. Can I create conversation page ads and retargeting ads myself? I've never heard of these.
So that's a really good question. So currently it is only available internally. It's still in GA, but it will be rolled out publicly to everybody in the very near future. So
conversation placement, right?
Correct. Yeah. So you'll be able to access it soon, but more just to keep on your radar for when it is available in the near future. But you're totally correct that it is currently not ready to be rolled out to everybody just yet.
But retargeting?
Retargeting is also on the horizon. You should be able to have access to that in the near future as well.
Oh yeah, actually, wait, I think we rolled that out. Conversation page is definitely something that's going to be rolled out next week. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be in a live beta mode because there's a few things that we're reiterating on, but really excited for us to be able to release that to you guys. So stay tuned for that. You'll have a full slew of help articles, Reddit ads posts, and a ton of information to help you get started with that. So stay tuned. And also when it launches next week, you'll see a note of that in the ads UI too. But retargeting available now, and just got to make sure you have your pixel installed because that's what it builds off of, as Lawson mentioned earlier. So yeah.
Sorry about that. There's a lot of betas and things going on the backside, so there's always new things being rolled out. But if you do want to access retargeting, again, sorry, it is available. You'll be able to access that when you are creating your actual ad groups. There will be an option to select what audience you want to be using, and it defaults to the Reddit audience, which is going to be your auction inventory. But if you touch that drop down, you can select retargeting, assuming you do have the Reddit pixel in place.
Yep. Is there an optimal frequency or indicator of creative wear out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it really depends on what your targeting is and how much you're spending. So if you have very narrow targeting and you're only targeting a few subreddits and you're spending a lot, then obviously you're going to be hitting the same people with the same ad a lot, and you are going to need to refresh your creative more. And on the flip side of that too, if you have very broad targeting and lower spend, you probably don't need to refresh creative because you're just in such a huge pool of users. So it really just depends on who you're targeting, how much you're spending, what your bids are. But the easiest way to sort of determine whether you are hitting creative wear out or not is looking at CTRs, or if you have a Reddit pixel in place, looking at conversion numbers. And if you're seeing them starting to drop off week over week, that's an indicator that your creative is just getting a little bit familiar to your targets, and you might want to update those to something a little bit more fresh and current, just to keep everyone's interest.
Yeah, and I just like to add there too, we do have those best practices of when to change and refresh, but you got to test, right? Like if something's really working for you and continues to be a strong performer, it's okay to keep it up, So yeah, just always test, check in. Each campaign is going to be different. All right. Okay. Where do I find the place to set up retargeting and placing above the comments section? Oh, okay. I think this is asking a few things. So we'll answer, where do you find the place to set up retargeting? And then we'll talk about where do you find the conversations page one. So,
So with retargeting, again, when you are in the ad group stage of creating your campaign, you're going to start creating the ad, but then when you get to selecting your audience, you'll be able to select a drop-down where you can choose between the Reddit audience, which is going to be your general auction inventory, and retargeting audiences, which are going to be retargeting off of that Reddit pixel data. So that's where you can set up making a specific retargeting ad group. And then in terms of the comment pages, It will be, when it is rolled out, it's going to be the same thing where you will be able to select whether or not the ad's going to be running in only comment pages or anywhere else in any other ad slot in the ad group level. And more details will come out when we announce that.
Yeah, so this is definitely insider knowledge, and another reason to always attend our workshops, because you might hear about things before they actually release. So, but yeah, it's gonna happen next week, and there will be a ton of help art. Well, not a ton, but there'll be a few solid help articles about this. We won't let you blindly have to fend for yourself. So not only stay tuned for the Reddit ads post, which will have Reddit help articles, as well as there'll be a very clear announcement in the ads UI too. So stay tuned for that. And then we can ask the next one, which also talks about conversation pages. How does targeting work for conversation page ads?
Yeah, another good question. So currently we are only able to target geo and run of site for comment pages. We can't layer on any specific audience targeting on there quite yet, just because it is a new product, and we are trying to just sort of give it the best possible chance it can have upon launch before we start layering on different targeting layers that are going to restrict it. But that will change in the future.
All right. Here's also another popular question. And also, I do note that someone called me out by name to ask to follow up on this one. So here we are again. So are there Reddit benchmarks for CTR, CPC, CPA, etc.? So I'll start this off and I'll pass it on to Lawson, because I know this is a question that we're going to get asked a ton. But yeah, it's very hard because there's, each campaign is very different. So while we are not able to give official benchmarks, there's reasons why they kind of vary from type to type. So Lawson, take it away.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a good point. It really does depend on your campaign specifically. So, if you have specific rates or specific targeting, it could also be budgets or flighting. All of that is going to affect what your CTR is going to be. So we don't have like hard benchmarks by certain verticals or certain products, because it really does depend on how you are setting up your campaign. And that all goes back to the importance of really thinking strategically when you're building out a campaign of what is my goal or objective, how much do I have to spend on this campaign, what are the flights going to be, and how open or restricted is my targeting going to be, because all of that will affect CTR.
Totally. For example, if you have a video that might have a lower CTR than a static, something that's running for a couple of days versus something running for a long time. But yeah, I'm also curious is if you guys are seeing the similar to other placements or other platforms too. I wonder how you gauge on those. But yes, great question. Next one. Winning Writers, thanks for joining again today. I see that you were from yesterday as well. Our goal is to get people to join our subreddit. How can we measure ad-driven joins versus normal joins? We touched on this a bit yesterday. So though our analytics isn't able to track, where the source of these joins are from, I think you could get a good gauge. I don't know if we covered this yesterday, but a good gauge would be kind of, how many clicks are on the ad. But yeah, this is something that we do not have internal analytics for. So we don't have definite breakouts of that. Yeah, good question though. And exciting that you want to get people to join your subreddit. I think another thing that we talked about yesterday too is just, if you run an ad to kind of encourage people to join your subreddit, just be really clear about what your subreddit is about, have a strong call to action. And so people will really understand, and those who click will hopefully join. But yeah. Okay. Ooh, okay. I like this one too. How can we find the one-on-one webinar for campaign setup? So this is on that splash page invite that we sent out to you guys. There's a few videos, recordings of the previous quarter. So those are available on the splash registration page. It's also going to be available on Reddit ads. I can send a link in our recap email that will link back to previous webinars. Yeah, so I will send that out to you, but it's also available right now on the splash page. But thank you. Thank you for asking that. And I'm glad that you want to take a look at previous sessions. Let's see. Are broad efficiency audiences only effective at certain spend levels or certain conversion event volume?
That's a good question. So typically I would say it really isn't specific to a certain spend level. As long as you're spending at least around $100, maybe a little bit more a week, and you're not running too many creatives so that you're able to get a good amount of statistically relevant impressions against that more broad targeted ad group, you probably will see some results that will indicate whether or not broader targeting is working for you. That said, though, that is a good point. You don't want to, spend a very small amount in broad targeting because your ad is just going to not hit a lot of people and it's not going to be hitting a really core audience. But as long as you have a reasonable amount of spend, such as around $100 a week, you should be in a good spot to test it.
Oh, and also, I just realized we're a little over our 45-minute allotted time, but we're going to keep going. So hopefully you're able to stay with us and you don't have a meeting at 11:45 or 2:45. Okay, next question. Why are ads bifurcated between iOS and Android?
That's a really good question. So we do that because we often see different efficiencies on different devices. So certain products or offers are going to resonate really well with, or they might resonate well with iOS users and maybe not as well with Android users or vice versa. Also because there are different numbers of users on those platforms. We might run a campaign where we end up seeing iOS being a better performer, but maybe there is a little bit more inventory competition in iOS. And because we have to pay more for it, it makes that placement less efficient than Android, where maybe for whatever reason in the auction, less people are bidding on it, and we might be able to get the same amount of conversions for a lower cost. So we typically recommend breaking things out. That said, though, you absolutely don't need to always break out your ad groups by iOS and Android. You can run as all mobile devices, which is just going to target mobile in general. And that's also a good way to run your campaign where, if you do have a smaller budget or you really don't feel comfortable splitting things out to a, specific mobile platform level, testing mobile versus desktop, for example, is a very valid test to see, what's working, what isn't working, and where you can sort of find efficiencies. But that's sort of our mentality behind why we break those out. Usually is there sometimes are pockets of efficiencies, and then sometimes we see iOS and Android users performing in parity with one another. So it's all part of the testing and learning process.
Yep, the more you know, right?
Definitely.
Okay, should I run video, GIFs, or static images?
It really depends on what your objective is. So this is another part of testing and just seeing what works. If you're running a campaign where you want to drive video views or sort of higher level actions like a page view or something, definitely worth testing. You might see video perform better just because it is a little bit splashier and more attention grabbing. But on the flip side of that too, we've definitely seen campaigns where certain products or offers do really well with statics, or sometimes GIFs are sort of that in-between creative that is resonating better with your audience. So it really depends. But again, if you have all three asset types, test them out, see what works, see what doesn't. Make sure that you have, again, that statistical relevance amount of data behind the creative and pivot from there.
Yep, testing. Okay, I like this one too. What is a strong bid?
Yeah, so again, it really depends on who you're targeting, how long your campaign's running, and what your budgets are. So if you are running with very broad targeting, like run of site, for example, you can keep your bids fairly efficient. It depends on the time of year. So if you were running last week during Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you would need a higher bid just because almost every retailer is trying to spend during that week. If you were running in Q1, rates are going to be a little bit lower because there's less auction density and you can win. So it really does change quarter over quarter and month to month, and it really does depend on your targeting. But in general, use higher rates when you have more narrow targeting, and you can have lower rates when you have more open targeting. And then just keep in mind, are there holidays as I'm running? Because you can always change your rates. So if you're going into a holiday, raise your rates a little bit, and then post-holiday or times when there aren't any big promotions or retail events, you can have more efficient bids and play around with it that way.
In the same vein, talking about bids and budget, what % of budget do you recommend allocating to primary versus secondary versus efficiency audiences?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, it really depends on how much budget you have to play with and what your objectives are and how long the campaign is going to run. Typically, we would say you want to keep the majority of your budget at the start in your primary ad group just to make sure that the campaign is performing and you're able to see some good metrics back. But you also want to give your secondary audiences and your broad targeted audiences a fair chance to prove themselves out. If you put 80% of your budget into the primary ad group and 10 to secondary and run of site, it likely won't prove out because there isn't enough spend going there to show you a good CTA. So I would probably recommend going with something like a 50% primary ad group, 25 to secondary, and 25 to run of site. You might even weight up the secondary ad group to 30% just because you know that audience is more than likely going to convert pretty well, whereas run of site is more of a test. But again, just sort of keep in mind, what is your objective and how much do you have to spend and how long do you have to run?
Yep. And I think in that orange red text, we also say, give it some time too, right? After you make those optimizations. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You never want to make a change and then within a day decide this works and this doesn't, just because not enough time has passed for those changes to come into effect and you to be able to see, a change in user behavior. Okay.
What minimum audience size do you recommend? For example, at least 1 million?
Yeah, good question. So typically on my side, I want to have as large of an audience as possible because again, the bigger your audience, the lower you can have your rates and the more people you can hit with your ads, which typically translates into more people making a purchase. It does really depend though on your budgets and your flight dates. If you're running a short campaign and you don't have huge budgets, then you don't need very broad targeting and you can go fairly specific with it because you will probably be able to spend, for example, you could probably spend $2,000 in a narrowly targeted ad group over the course of a week. But if you were running a larger campaign and you, needed to spend $5,000 per week for every week for like 3 months, you are going to want broader targeting just because you're going to be hitting those users in a narrow target a lot and you're going to have ad burnout. You're going to have people not purchasing as highly once they've seen the ad too many times. And eventually we are just going to kind of max out our frequency and you're not going to be able to deliver. So it all, again, really does depend on how long you're running and how much budget you actually have to spend.
Cool. Getting to the last few here. So here's one about, can we receive more information on demographic data? I can also help with this, but Lawson, go first.
Yeah, so we do have some general demo data inside of the Reddit dashboard. So you will be able to split it out by geo, for example. You can look up what subreddits are actually working for each individual ad group and sort of see that demo layer. Because Reddit does not require a lot of personal information when they sign up, we don't have a ton of first party, really detailed demographic info, such as like age or gender.
Yeah.
But we do tend to see that when we think about our campaigns more from a strategy of what is my product, what is my offer, and what sorts of communities are going to engage with this product or offer, and who is actually going to be buying it. We tend to see our campaigns perform on par with our major competitors, because it is the same general mindset as doing demo targeting. But we currently don't have the ability to split out demo targeting by like age or gender in the Reddit platform at the moment.
Yes, exactly. I think the huge allure of Reddit is that, here we're focused on our interests, we're focused on, what we're actually into. So, if you're just because you're as a beauty brand, you might think that you're targeting ages 20 or 20 to 30 or whatever for females, but makeup can be applied to all ages, all genders, all types of people. So, yeah. And then I've got two that I'll bundle together. Oh, here, could you please repeat, what does efficiency ad group stand for?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So efficiency ad groups are going to be our very broadly targeted ad groups. So that's going to be a placement where, our primary ad group is targeting our core audience, right? So if you're a gaming publisher, you want your primary ad group to be our gaming, because that is exactly the kind of person who is going to be making a purchase. Secondary ad groups are going to be ad groups that are sort of related to that, like an entertainment or television or movies or something along those lines. And then efficiency might be run of site, for example, where it's very broadly targeted, but because it is broadly targeted, you are able to hit a lot of users with your ad at very efficient rates. And a lot of times we do see run of site placements do very well for advertisers. So it's, to sum it up, it is just sort of as broad targeted as you can do, ideally run of site.
Nice. Let's just bundle these last two in here. What should my click and view through attribution windows be? And can I include view through conversions after launch?
Sure. So first off, you can definitely include view through attribution post-launch. All you are doing is, if you're using the Reddit pixel, you are going to go to the conversions section of the ads dashboard. And from there, you can click on the create pixel button and edit your click and view through windows at any time. So if you didn't set up the campaign with view through, completely understand. A lot of people don't, but hopefully after watching this webinar, you are considering view through. So no need to worry, you can go back and add that. In terms of the window recommendations, on my side, I usually want to recommend as broad of a window as possible. Again, just because due to the nature of Reddit users, a lot of people are on our platform to engage with the content and to contribute. And they might see an ad, but they might not be willing to, break from their ad experience in the moment to convert, but they more than likely are converting at some point within the attribution windows we can track. So it's worth playing around with. You might want to try looking at a 28-day look back window. And then if you want to see, what exactly is the conversion tail on my campaign, again, you can always change it. So you can change it to 14 days, you can change it to 7 days, and just play around with those levers and see how long does it typically take for users to actually convert. And then once you sort of see a trend there, then you'll know. But it really is it does go by case. But to start, I would say as broad as possible in the beginning and then whittle it down from there.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so I'm so happy that you guys love the slides and the cup. So the slides will be available after the presentation for sure. I'm going to send a really awesome recap email, kind of reviewing what we talked about, including the articles we talked about. And there'll also be a recording of this in case you want to watch it again. So the recap email will also have a Reddit ads post. So a ton of stuff for you guys there, including some great downloads that will be really helpful, that are special to only these people who have attended. So great stuff there. And then the one-on-one campaign consultation. So after this, we'll take note of all the names and select a lucky winner who will be able to speak with Lawson and chat through any other questions that you guys were maybe too shy to ask about here, or any kind of recommendations that you are looking for. So we'll follow up in the recap email with the winner of the campaign consultation. And I'll definitely also add a link to our Reddit swag store in case you want to order any cool Reddit branded stuff there. But yeah, I think one more question. You guys are, you guys. So this one says, you guys are awesome. Thank you. But thank you guys. Thank you for joining. And I'm really happy that this session was a success. We want to do these every quarter. So stay tuned for more announcements for the next upcoming ones.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.